all of that is open. Okay, cool. So I want to say, first of all, welcome to everyone, and including a very special welcome to Elizabeth Macneal, the author of Circus of Wonders, our book this month, which is so good. So we're going to talk all about this. But first, a couple of housekeeping things. If you, let's see, I'm going to ask a whole questions, and there will be some spoilers, but you can probably, if you haven't finished the book, you can probably watch at least the first beginning before you actually get into the spoilers. This will be on our YouTube channel later if you want to watch it later, or if you want to be like, oh, okay, this is enough for me, I don't want to get spoiled. If you have questions, down at the bottom, there's the chat on the sidebar, and then there's, you guys probably don't see share screen and record because I don't know if you do, but there's another thing that says Q&A. If you click there, any questions that you have, type them in there, and then in the end, we can get to those. And yeah, I also would like to say that I was going to go take my ADD meds because clearly I need them. And if you take ADD meds, you may understand this. I took it and then immediately said, what did I just swallow? And it turns out it was Xanax. So I'm maybe slightly, a little bit, I'm very calm. I'm not drinking. I'm having, instead of the normal rum, I'm just having Diet Coke. This is going to be fine.
It will be great. Right? and I've just had an incredibly frantic time because my 7-month-old son has just melted down in a way that he never has before. So luckily he stopped crying at approximately 18:59 UK time. So I'm so happy to be here now.
Perfect. Oh, so it's like 10 o'clock at night there.
No, only 7 o'clock.
Oh, yes, I
would go crazy if he went to bed at 10 o'clock. No, I need at least 3 hours to myself every evening.
I would be like, you English people just go along with no sleep at all. Who knew? Okay, so I have so many questions. I absolutely adored this book. I have read it 4 times.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
You probably know it better than I do.
Well, I probably did before I took the Xanax. So now that we're even. The first time I read it just for me. And then the second time I read it for like, oh, okay, like what are the themes? And then the third time I read it is usually months after I read it the first time, so that before we open up the discussion, so that I can kind of remind myself. And then the fourth time was this morning when I was like, what's this book about? Because I have a terrible memory. And then kind of went through again. I'm still going to get the names wrong. I'm going to try my hardest.
That's okay. I'm terrible with memory when it comes to reading as well. I just, I don't know what with reading, is it like in one eye, out the other? I don't know, because in one ear, out the other doesn't quite work, does it, when you're reading it? But
Exactly. It's so funny. When I was young, I remember books that I read when I was young, like so well. And now I'll read a book and I'll just be like, oh, that was a great book. What was it about? I don't remember, but I remember I loved it. So yeah, old age. So we first start with, every time we ask the same 5 questions that we ask everyone across the board. So the first one is, where would you be 2 weeks into the zombie apocalypse?
Actually, no, I think I'd be thriving, because I have the most useful husband on the face of the earth. He is absolutely amazing. So he can do everything. So he would be able to like build shelter, cook me a meal, forage for foods, and yeah, my friends always joke that in the apocalypse they want him on their side. So if I were by myself, I'd be dead within about half an hour. But with him and his sort of his power tools, I think I stand a pretty good chance.
I love it. What is an underrated book you think everyone should read?
This is so hard, because how to describe which books. Okay, The Winter Soldier by Daniel Mason. I don't know if it's underrated, but it's underread in my opinion. It's an absolutely incredible novel. It might be really well read in the US. I don't know if he's sort of more well known in the US because he is American. But it's set during the Second World War, and it's about no, First World War actually, I think, and it's about love in this convent for kind of, I suppose people. I'm describing it incredibly badly, but it's absolutely spectacular, and it's just beautiful, evocative writing. It's got characters that have stayed with me, and it's just absolutely perfect. And its ending is sublime. It's a bittersweet ending, and I do love a bittersweet ending.
Oh, I love it. Well, I've never read it, so I'm adding it to my list.
Well, you must.
I will. Your favorite word?
Graffiti.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it sounds fun.
Yes. How do you like your eggs?
I like them. I like the pan, like, so the oil's so hot it's smoking, and then it means that the white goes really crispy and the yellow's still dippy.
Perfect. And will you be my friend?
Of course.
Yay!
If you'll tolerate my 7-month-old crying baby.
Oh my gosh, happily. Let's see. Okay, so the first thing, I have so many questions about this, but my first was, what was your inspiration for this book?
So, like I think lots of other authors, I get really excited when I come across fragments of stories or people's lives. And for me, I was actually really stuck on my second novel, and I spent a whole year writing a book which didn't make it. And then, you know, when I was sort of really, really struggling with that, I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna read any old book. And it was a book of Victorian photography. And in it, there was one small black and white image. It's a carte de visite, is what it's officially called. And it was of a bearded woman, but underneath, and she was sort of dressed very smartly and holding a book, but underneath it was written, unidentified bearded woman, age 23. And her name was smudged and it was lost, and it was sort of almost felt like she had been lost to time. But I just wanted to know more about her, you know, what was her life like? How had she come to be photographed, you know? And from that, I began to learn a whole lot more about sort of circuses, and I suppose the technical term is freak shows, even though that is of course a loaded term now. And that was, you know, when I started learning about it, you know, the more I read and researched, the more fascinating I found it, especially given this was such a huge part of history that had kind of just been swept under the rug and forgotten or even mistold. Like in films like The Greatest Showman, the kind of blockbuster hit. So yeah, it was that image which sparked, I suppose, the novel.
I think it's so fascinating that they recorded her age, but not the name. I have always had like a great fascination for circuses and circus performers, and I actually have. It was interesting as I was going through. Probably 75% of them, I was like, oh, I know that. And then there were several I was like, I've never heard of it. I've got to go look. But I mean, like, even to the point, like, you're one of the only people who has, that I know, who is like, oh, the Millie Christine. And I'm like, oh my God.
The McCoy girls, yeah.
Oh, this is such a, what I loved about.
Heartbreaking.
So what I loved about this book is that supposedly it's by them, right? Like it's and I loved that because, and you talk about this so much, about the idea of these stories that not only that are lost, but also that that how often people have lost their agency, even, you know, during that time of, you know, we would, you know, we would be like, oh, this person was, you know, born in a pumpkin, and, you know, their mother saw an elephant, and, you know, these things that at the time seemed like such this whimsical, and then later you look at it and you're like, oh, that's because that way we wouldn't look at these people as human. We would be like, oh,
completely.
Yeah.
And it's all part of the showman's spiel. And yeah, that just, I became very interested in that, you know, who gets to hold the pen, who tells whose story. And a lot of the book is kind of about that idea of mistellings, of bias. Even, you know, so there's a character called Toby, and he is the brother of the showman Jasper Jupiter. And when they were in the Crimean War together, Toby took photographs which were kind of propaganda, they were skewering the truth. And so just all of the different, you know, what is a lie, what is the truth, you know, even can memories be faulty? And, you know, and the really obvious example of kind of that sort of having something stolen from you is, of course, Nell, where she's kind of portrayed as the queen of the moon and stars, and, you know, it's all very, you know, her fame explodes, and she's this absolute phenomenon, but of course she's left thinking, you know, who am I, what is my story? And she feels kind of cut off and very voiceless, where she's been kind of marketed and sold to an audience in this particular way that to her doesn't feel authentic, or doesn't, you know, where her own past kind of feels cut off from her.
I love that. I think one of the lines that you wrote was every writer is a thief and a liar.
Yeah.
And it's such a great line in so many ways. But what did you mean by that?
I suppose that was sort of a, you know, I've been expecting to be asked this since I wrote the book, and nobody's asked me that yet. That doesn't mean that I actually have a particularly good answer for it, but I've sort of been like, is anyone going to mention that? No, we'll just forget I wrote that. But, you know, it's sort of, I guess that really is about the idea of appropriation, which for me was like a really big part of writing this book, where, you know, I am an able-bodied woman, and I felt like, you know, the idea of, am I trespassing on these stories? And I felt this great need to get it right and to make it as accurate as possible. And so I suppose that every writer, to an extent, is a thief, because they are taking other people's stories, or, you know, whether they are real or or they are imagined, because Nell is entirely imagined, but they are kind of turning them into something kind of digestible. But, you know, for me, what would have been classified as lying, in a sense, would have been getting it wrong, would have been telling, you know, the story of someone like Nell, who has, you know, a condition called melanocytic nevus, and, you know, sort of doing her a disservice and not being authentic in how someone like her would have felt in that experience. So I suppose, yeah, writing is all about kind of being a magpie and kind of stealing these little bits here and there and kind of threading them all together to create something entertaining and, in a way, to be the showman. But my hope is that as an author, that my books can kind of ring with truth as well, because someone can imagine themselves in that perspective, and someone can kind of empathize more and understand and realize kind of the truths of history, rather than kind of mistelling it, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. And I
should have been much better prepared for that question, given I've been anticipating it for the last year.
Well, it was a great answer. And I really think you nailed it. It was interesting as I read it, because I'm a writer, but I write nonfiction. And as I read it, I was like, that's true even for nonfiction, because even though I'm writing something that's true, it's my experience and my perception and and I'm taking all of these other people's stories, because it's not just me involved. And so I loved that was there. And I loved the idea that you can never truly tell every person's story. I thought it was really interesting how so you had Nell, you know, when they basically said, like, so you joined up, and even though they all knew for sure that she had been sold and stolen, and she was like, I'm going to rewrite the story, this is my own narrative. And in part of me was like, good for you for controlling your own narrative. But then another part was like, no, say like, that dick stole me and my dad's an asshole. And you know, one of the things
so many people respond to trauma very differently, because that would have been a major trauma for her. And, you know, for her, whether or not it was the right thing or the healthy thing to do, I think sometimes a very human urge can be kind of to quash it and to minimize it. And I suppose that was what she was doing to kind of feel like she had control. Someone has just asked about Nell's condition. Yeah, someone has also just answered. Yes, CMN, giant congenital melanocytic nevus. So that's what it is.
Very good.
Sorry, that was a slight diversion. Maybe
No,
I should
that's
mute
no,
the
that,
chat
no,
thing. But thank you for all your
that's-
questions. I'm trying not to look at them too much while I'm answering.
yeah, I get way too distracted, and you can tell that I have not had my ADD medication, because normally I would be like, "What's this? What's this?" Instead, I'm like,
Yeah, that's a difficulty of writing historical fiction as well. I do find myself being like, "Ooh, a shiny thing. Ooh, another shiny thing." So I sort of have to almost delay the bulk of my research, otherwise I just get too distracted, and I have to focus on the plot and the characters, because that's what will lead a reader through the story.
So when you write a story like this, do you go into it knowing this is what's going to happen, or do you write it and the characters just say like, no, this is what I want to have happen?
I plan meticulously. For me, I don't tend to find it sort of like, oh, and then the character decided that they didn't want to go to this place, so I just let them do what they wanted, which I know really works for some people, and I'm not slighting that approach at all. But for me, I'm a meticulous plotter. Like I have an Excel spreadsheet which frightens all of my other author friends. And, you know, before I start writing, I even have, you know, I have it broken down by chapter, where I even estimate how many the word count of each chapter and everything that happens in that chapter. But I really do veer from that structure, because when I started writing Circus of Wonders, I actually didn't even have Jasper and Toby's perspective. That came because as I started writing from my very detailed spreadsheet, I realized that, you know, there needed to be more. There needed to be, I felt that Nell's viewpoint was very naive, and I also felt that a show and writing a novel about a circus and a show, I felt like I wanted to explore so many different angles. I wanted to look so much at kind of conflicting reports and ideas and truth, and, you know, there was just so much I wanted to do. And so, yeah, I started following that plan, and then I made a new plan, and it evolves. But the way I think about it is like, it's a really naff analogy, but I think of it like I'm going on a journey, and I'm not just going to get in my car and start driving. I'm going to put into my, you know, my Google Maps where I'm going, and that doesn't mean that there'll be like a traffic jam and then my route will change or something like that. But at every point, I need to know how I'm going to get to the end.
Love it. You know, I really enjoyed Toby's perspective, simply because he's such a flawed character, and he also struggles a lot with the truth, with, you know, that not only like creating this false narrative when he was creating this propaganda in war, and then later trying to decide, spoilers, by the way, I'm about to get into spoilers, the idea of like, but I tripped and killed Dash. It wasn't my fault, but maybe it was my fault. And just kind of retelling that,
lying to himself.
Yes. I loved that. I loved how no one's perspective was 100%, I don't want to say stable, but like 100% believable.
Well, accurate. You know, everyone is an unreliable narrator. That's what I thought a lot when I was writing that novel. And I think maybe being one of 4 siblings kind of reinforces to me that I'm always an unreliable narrator. Whenever I have an account of how something has gone down, that is not the same as what my sister says, you know, and things like that, you know, that I find writing perspectives really interesting for that reason, because everyone is coming to it with their own baggage, and everyone is deluding themselves to make them feel like a good person, when, you know, that you suppress things, you hide things, you pretend, even when you're doing something, sometimes you don't necessarily know why or if you intend to. But yeah, I guess I'm really interested in nuance, and that was why I sort of decided to have Toby's kind of his entire history of what was true. You know, the whole book really is about truth, and from what we were talking about earlier, I think that's, yeah, it was just sort of another iteration of that.
So speaking of nuances, the
Yeah.
first time that I read the book, I was like, I hate everyone in this village. They're all terrible to her. This Linny
Yeah.
guy is harassing her. I hate them all. I'm so glad she escaped. The second time I read it, I was like, she has isolated herself. They may
Mm,
really love her. It's possible Linny is like really into her and she is just so scared that she can't
mm.
deal with, and so I kind of go back and forth, like, is there a right answer, or is it supposed to be a nuance of you see whatever you want to see?
Yeah, I did want that to be the case, and I'm really glad you felt that way. I think that some of the behavior that she comes up against is inexcusable. Like, I think her, or just sort of straight more straightforward. You know, that her brother Charlie really, it's like he thinks he's protecting her, but he's really othering her, and I think that is sort of more clear cut. But I just think that often, you know, there is, it isn't sort of really straightforward in life. You know, sometimes, you know, Nell could isolate herself, but there were also reasons for her isolating herself. Um, and yeah, that it kind of, I read a lot of biographies, kind of, particularly there was one called Marked for Life by Joy Davidow, and that was about having a port wine birthmark. And you know, she herself in that memoir, she talks very movingly about whether she herself drew herself away because of it, and or if it was because other people were kind of forcing her into that space. And so I think that generally it is an area of a huge amount of nuance, rather than it being like, sorry, I'm recovering from a cold. So yeah, I think it was a bit of both really, but I think it's clear that community that we see Nell in at the beginning is a stifling one, and that she has a lot more to give, whether or not she feels able to give, maybe whether that's because she doesn't feel able to give it, or because nobody is giving her the opportunity.
Yes. um I thought it was really interesting. So oh gosh, am I going to get their names right? So Daisy and Violet Hilton, they were conjoined twins in the like maybe 30s, I guess, is when they started to be popular. And they lived actually really close to where I am. They died like way before I was born, but they lived in the area, and they were called the San Antonio Twins. And so I had read a lot about them. And I always thought it was really interesting as I was reading this book, because this book goes from like this, obscurity and feeling, othered and very isolated, and then blossoms into, and we'll get into that, blossoms into, her, finding herself. And it's sort of the opposite of Daisy and Violet Hilton, who, were, big into the glory, although they had, really terrible lives and were exploited. But from the outside in, you would be like, oh my gosh, they've got it all made, and they're famous, and they're this. And then in the end, they, were deserted, and they worked in a grocery store checkout, and died at home of the flu, and nobody even knew, because they had isolated themselves, and they had,
That's heartbreaking.
it absolutely was. And there's something about comparing it to this that makes it feel like, okay, you know what, there were other stories as well. There were um one of the things that I loved about this is interspersed in here all of the Frankenstein references. And the idea of, who is the monster? Are we the monsters? Do we make monsters? And the phrase, that the quote that you use over was, I was benevolent, good, misery made me a fiend. And I think that's so fantastic, because that speaks to almost every person in this book.
Yeah, yeah, completely. And sorry, go on.
Oh no, I mean, every single person, including even the, you know, the smaller roles of, like, I can't remember which one it was, but one of the sideshow performers who had also gone to a sideshow and to, you know, watch other, and you know, the idea that we are all human and we are all uh, amazing and wonderful and also horrible, and can make monsters and can make
Yeah,
ourselves monsters.
totally. Yeah. So first of all, kind of being shaped by experience, and second of all, kind of the idea of who is a fiend and who is the baddie almost. Because I like to kind of play with the idea of narrative and fairy stories, because there are lots of, you know, fairy tales referenced in the book, and, like, you know, who is the villain? And I suppose that taps in again to the idea of kind of bias and storytelling. And, you know, like Toby, we were talking about, you know, the spoiler of him and Dash in the Crimean War. And to Toby, you know, Dash is the villain, and therefore the villain gets punished, the villain gets killed. But to Stella and to Dash, and even to Jasper, you know, Dash is their hero. And so kind of playing with those expectations, and you know, Toby very much feeling, you know, when I really think of Toby when I think of that line, you know, I was benevolent and good, misery made me a fiend. But he himself, in committing that act, has become the villain in their lives. And, you know, it's just no one is straightforwardly bad.
Yes, yeah. The first time that I read it, I was like, oh, Jasper's the villain. And then I read it again, and I was like, yeah, I mean, he's a
Well, he
villain, but
sort of
he's
is,
also
isn't
kind of
he? Yeah.
a sociopath. Like, I'm kind of like, he
Yeah.
almost doesn't have a choice. But to me, Toby, especially the second time I read it, I was like, I was the first time I read it, I was like, no, I don't want it to end like this. I want him I want him to choose right. Go, you know, don't go after your brother. Make sure that, you know, Nell and Pearl are okay. What are you doing? Why are you?
Yeah.
Um, but there was something so realistic about that choice. Was it hard for you to make that choice to not have the quintessential happy ending?
I mean, am I allowed to say it wasn't? I
Well,
guess.
the easy happy ending. How about that?
Yeah. Well, I guess, and this is spoilers galore. I never really saw Toby as sort of the right partner for Nell. I felt that he was the right thing for her at that time in her life, but I felt that he was kind of trying to put these narratives on her and kind of assuming what she wanted, a bit like her brother did to her, you know, like that she wants the cottage with the blue door and sort of in obscurity and sort of hidden away. And that's not the life that she wants. And so in a way, I sort of saw it like a kind of a normal relationship breakup. And, you know, I have had those in my past, you know, where you still feel fondness towards that person, but you realize that they're shaping you in ways that you don't want to be shaped. And so in a way, I felt that you know, I really wanted it to be this note of female friendship, where it's the women in this book who have stuck with each other. It's the women who have, you know, Stella has sort of fallen apart in that apartment, but like Nell has listened to her and accepted her on her own terms. Like, none of the women are trying to really push each other into this kind of ideal kind of ending, or this ideal life that none of them want, you know, that they are just kind of friends and there for each other and taking things as they come. And to me, that was the note I wanted to end on. And I felt that Toby, you know, while not sort of a villainous character, I felt that he wasn't really Nell's romantic hero.
Yeah, I loved of the, like, the chosen family, that the verses of, like, the Jupiter brothers and the flying sisters. And even though the flying sisters were, none of them were truly related, that their family was so strong and healthy
Yeah.
and wonderful. And the idea that you can have this chosen family, I think, is so wonderful.
Yeah, and Nell's maternal instinct towards Pearl, that was one of my it was one of my favorite parts to write, even though I actually found it the most difficult. just, you know, I've now got my baby. I didn't have my baby at the time I was writing. I wasn't even pregnant when I was writing it. But, you know, that sort of need to nurture and love and protect, I thought was just such a human instinct. And, you know, even when I used to nanny, I became so attached to the children I looked after. And for me, it was just such an important facet of her character that she became so attached to this little girl and really would have done anything for her.
Yes, I love their relationship. I loved the relationship with Pearl and her mouse, and how that came back around in the end, and I loved when Nell opened up the mouse's cage to let the mouse go, and the mouse didn't leave, and Nell was like, is it because of fear or is it
Mm,
because of safety? And I loved that
yeah.
duality of like seeing her in that position, and also Toby was in that position, and I mean so many of
Yeah,
them.
and Nell was in that position, you know, things are really going wrong and she's staying and she must, you know, and Pearl's position, of course, is very fragile too. And, you know, Nell's desire to protect her and all of those things, you know, that's the point where the circus is starting to kind of fall apart, but they're all still there.
Yes, yes. Um, so I don't know if this was intentional. I have a tendency to pick out things in books, and then people later are like, "Nope, you're crazy. That's not a real thing." Um, but for me, as I was reading it, I kept seeing these allusions to different flowers, and I know there's like the Victorian
Mm,
language of flowers, and I thought it was really interesting how it would be like, you know, one person who was about innocence has, you know, a dandelion, and then Jasper, like, you know, breaks apart a dandelion clock, and all of the
mm,
like the good people who I love, I'm like, oh, okay, they've got a flower. Like, and when the bearded lady, when she puts the flower in her beard, and Nell is like, I can't imagine what that's like to bring attention to something. Um,
mm.
was that intentional, or am I reading it in too
Um,
much?
and maybe I think that I find it so interesting when people do ask me things which actually aren't intentional, and that was not intentional. But often, you know, there are these subconscious things bubbling up because I'm fascinated by the Victorian language of flowers. My first novel, The Doll Factory, kind of looks at that in a huge amount of detail, you know, because it's kind of around the pre-Raphaelite painters. I won't talk about that obviously at length now, but you know, but they frequently use flowers in their paintings to kind of denote different things, like particularly Millet's painting of Ophelia, where she's kind of surrounded by forget-me-nots and other flowers with particular resonance. And so you know, I suppose you know, when you're writing, a lot of it is kind of under the surface, and a lot of, you know, it's very difficult for me really to say, first of all, what my inspirations were, and second, what my intentions were, because so much of it is just subconscious, because it's just me kind of bringing together all the things I've thought about and learned and experienced. And even if I can't directly attribute them, they are there. So I'm really pleased that you found that, because that's, as a specific interest of mine, it wasn't a conscious one, but these things are always kind of finding a way out.
Oh, I love that. I love the stories, inside stories.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's see. So one other thing I wanted to talk about was, okay, first of all, is it Crimea or Crimea? Because I don't know how to pronounce it.
Crimea.
Okay, so in the Crimean War, I thought it
Yeah.
was so. I mean, there was so much that I learned about from reading this. But one of the things that really stuck with me was this thing that you wrote about how there were basically bystanders, like ladies who lunch, basically, who had their picnic
Mm,
out and are watching. Um, I had no idea that
yeah.
that is.
It, it was a completely fascinating war, where it was sort of spectacle as much as it was war. And you know, they would stand on the hill and watch these battles. They would, you know, lady tourists would come and they'd go out on steamers and they'd watch, you know, the bomb, you know, they'd watch sort of all the gunfire and the shelling and all of the, and even, you know, every evening, at the operating house, they would put on a theatrical performance of kind of these farces of like entitled things like Slasher and Crasher. And, you know, the person who would be manning the guns in the day would sort of be this sort of like woman in a dress kind of acting out these things. And so much of this war was about entertainment. And I found that totally surreal and fascinating. It was also one of the first wars where you know, there was journalism. So there were lots of different kind of accounts, which again feels like a sort of performance. And also military is so much about performance itself, you know, with kind of the shining epaulettes and the brass bands and all of that. The two things were just so entwined. And that for me kind of that you know, circus is war and war is circus, you know, those things kind of, they shine a light on each other, and it made the circus darker. And in a way that the kind of, I think it makes war darker in a way as well, that, you know, that these groups of kind of tourists were standing watching men being shot and blown up, and for them it was like sort of going to the theater.
Yeah, I was struck by the fact that when I read it first, I was like, oh, that seems like just inhuman. And then at the same time, I was like, but you know, the circus, very similar sort of thing. I mean, not just with the people who were being exploited, but with the, you know, the elephants and I mean, you know, they, especially back then, were, you know, treated sort of horribly. And it made me kind of think, you know, are there things now? And clearly there are, but there are, you know, the things now that we, that we now are looking at in a way, and I'm just as guilty of it, of, you know, I get on Twitter and I just look at things and I don't think about the fact that, oh, there's people behind this. This isn't just, it's not just, you know, doom scrolling entertainment. Like, there are actual people involved in this. And I don't know, it was fascinating and also jarring, but I think jarring in a good way.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, fairy tales.
Fairy tales.
Oh my gosh, first of all, I'm a big fairy tale. I don't know if you can see, but I have like a whole stack of fairy tales. So I'm a big fan.
Wow, you've got quite a display there. Are those dolls?
Oh my God, ridiculous. But it's especially like dark old fairy tales and Germanic and Swedish, and
they're all quite dark, really.
They are, yes. And but what I loved is that, first of all, when you first start talking about, you know, Nell and her brother reading about it, and she uses this phrase, plain healed humans, that was like that's what you wanted to get to. And I loved the idea of that she said that it wasn't like it was plain healed humans, and it was, there was something in that. And then the way that you changed that once she finally started, you know, telling these stories to Pearl, and she was like, you know what, I'm going to change this up. Actually, the mermaid is the one who is the, you know, amazing creature, and this guy is like, I'm going to be like you, I'll sail it, I'll put a fishtail on. She's like, you're an idiot, see ya. Oh my gosh, perfection.
Yeah, well, there's an amazing book called Disfigured by Amanda Leduc, and she has cerebral palsy, and it basically talks about how damaging she found fairy tales. And I guess that for me was, you know, I really wanted to make sure that I did not accidentally create a harmful narrative, because stories are so important, you know, the way that stories are told, you know. Yeah, just what you were saying before about that, you know, like even, you know, saying that, you know, you doom scroll and you sort of don't think of the stories behind it. And I think there's a lot of that when it comes to kind of disability or disfigurement or facial difference, and where people don't think of the harm that they cause, and they don't think of the people behind it. Like, I don't know, the adaptation recently of The Witches, with Anne Hathaway, and that there was no mention in the book of it being a real condition, even though the book is full of kind of very harmful associations of kind of disfigurement generally. But they gave the witches, I don't know if you read about this, but they gave Anne Hathaway and the witches a real condition with their hands, which is ectrodactyly. And so all of a sudden, all of these children, or people generally who have ectrodactyly, are kind of being associated with witches. And you just think these poor children in the, you know, in the playground who are probably getting a hard enough time because of, you know, the media and films and books association of kind of disfigurement with villainy, which is terrible enough. But then when there are specific examples, and all of the campaign was around, you know, can you spot a witch? And just how damaging and detrimental that would be. And, you know, Warner Brothers then put out this statement saying that they had never, you know, that they hadn't even considered it, you know, and that if, you know, that the witches were meant to be these fantastical inhuman creatures. And it's like, well, if they're going to be fantastical inhuman creatures, why are you giving them a human condition? And, you know, that's a side rant which I could go off on for a while, but I can't even remember what your question was. I'm really sorry. I hope I answered it.
No, that was a really great side rant. So we were just talking about the fairy tales and about how she made her own fairy tale, and I was wondering if the idea of the, you know, the man who tried to make himself a mermaid, and she, you know, was like, you do not get it. Was that an analogy of Jasper trying to make himself othered with his, you know, illustrated body? I mean, not Jasper, Toby. Yeah,
to a point it was, you know, that which I mean, I suppose that was him kind of trying to assume an identity that wasn't his. But I read a lot about, you know, circus performance, and, you know, kind of the manufactured performance, which is what, you know, Toby would have been, versus the natural performers and everything like that, and how they're always kind of at odds with each other. But it definitely was on my mind when I was writing that, you know, what, and Stella at one point is like, you know, he can't just kind of all of a sudden turn himself into someone almost for the novelty for being a performer, when it's, you know, something that they have lived with.
Yes. I love that, and I love that for a lot of different reasons, but one of which is that so I have, you know, some disabilities, but my disabilities are invisible. And I always think that it's interesting how people with invisible disabilities, it's very easy to ignore them, but at the same time, it is so much easier to have an invisible disability that people can't automatically see and assume. And so I loved the idea of you touching on that there are these, you know, various different lives and I thought it was really well done.
Oh, thank you. And I also didn't mean to draw neat conclusions as well. You know, it's like that it's almost up to people to decide what they feel about it. You know, Stella feels one way about it, Toby feels a different way, Nell feels a different way. And, you know, that there are all of these kind of different opinions, just like none of the performers have the same response to the situation they find themselves in. You know, for Brunette, it's straight up exploitation, and she doesn't want to be part of it. You know, for Stella, it's empowerment, with, you know, an acknowledgement that it's not ideal. And, you know, for Nell, it's something in between.
Exactly. And I love that all of the people are given agency, which is the thing that they seem to be struggling with the most. And they're all given their perspective, and none of them are all good. None of them are all bad. I loved how complicated the people were, right? At first I wanted it to be like, all bad people do all bad things and all good people get all the good things. And then I was like, nope, that's not
well, Jasper kind of has his comeuppance, doesn't he?
Right.
His is not a happy ending.
Right. Let's see. Okay, so we've got some questions. We've got that. Oh, somebody asked me the name of the pink book. It is Millie Christine, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made. It's about conjoined twins who were born into slavery, and their life story is incredible. And it's supposedly they wrote it, probably ghostwritten with someone else, but they at least had a little more agency than some people, although my God, they had a rough life, but such
rough.
a good.
And they were kidnapped multiple times, and you know, just sort of passed from showman to showman. Showmen were tricked out of them as if they were kind of objects.
Yes. Let's see. Okay, so dun. Let's see what. Oh, already answered that question. Good question, Kelly. Let's see. The Pink Book answered that one. Okay, did Queen Victoria really entertain circus performers?
She did, and that was one of the most surprising facts to me, because I'm so interested in the Victorian era. You know, I have been for pretty much my, you know, since I was a child, basically. And I've read so much Victorian literature, so many non-fiction books, and yet I did not know that. And I think that that is a piece of history which has kind of been suppressed because it is unsavory. Where she, you know, she called Tom Thumb the pet of the palace, and she had, you know, all sorts of, you know, people with all sorts of conditions would kind of, it was described even by one historian as kind of a revolving door of people with conditions to her palace. You know, she entertained them all the time. She was known as the freak fancier, and yeah, that kind of her fascination with people with physical differences is kind of something which has, as I say, has just been suppressed because it does make people, it is so problematic. But yeah, that was all completely accurate.
I'm very glad that you wrote about that, because I have read so much about the circus performers. I knew that Queen Elizabeth often had lots of performers who would come in, and the way that it was always, because it typically is, it is explained by either the circus owner, or sometimes it's, you know, on the cabinet card or whatever. So it always made it sound like, oh, they got to go to the palace and they were entertained by the queen, and I was always like, man, that queen's awesome. She's like, no, everybody's awesome. And then once I read this, and I was like, oh shit, and I went back and like did a little more research, and I was like, oh,
well, there is that certain kind of voyeurism of it, you know, just kind of this obsession, because it really was an obsession of hers with difference, you know, which is troubling.
Yes.
Even if it did kind of, it reflected the current massive interest, but it was really because of her that the freak show, as it was known, boomed, because, you know, she offered her support and patronage and appreciation of it.
Yes. Let's see. Did you ever consider making Toby and Jasper twins? The way they spoke about each other, sharing the same heart, made me think that they were twins, but they weren't twins, right?
I didn't consider it. I had twins in my previous novel, and I know that it's sort of almost who were Iris and Rose, because of course flower names. And I am also aware that kind of twins in novels are a tiny bit tropish. So I think that I didn't have them in my second novel. I don't know if it was because of that, but I kind of also wanted Jasper to have the upper hand in age. I wanted him to be this older brother who Toby really looked up to. And so Toby had never really seen him as an equal, but kind of their paths started off on this sort of slight inequality, but then they kind of veered massively. Kind of, it's almost like it was sort of a slow chipping away because it was already structured like that. And I'm also one of, as I said, I'm one of four and none of us are twins. And there's a constant kind of jostling for hierarchy whenever we get together. And I'm the eldest. I'd like to say I'm top dog. I'm not Jasper though, I hope.
So I had a question on where did the line "I snatches whatever I seize"? Did that come from something, or is that just them and their private joke?
That came from a Crimean War narrative, where I can't remember which book, and I can't remember where it was, because I think I was researching this about 4 or 5 years ago. But I came across that line in the book, in the book I was reading, and it really just jumped out at me, because, you know, so much of, I could sort of go into it in the novel, you know, the Crimean War, there was just a huge amount of pillaging and theft, and soldiers just shipping back, Russian watches to their families back home to sell them. And, just so much stuff was just stolen and soldiers were just made rich on it, basically. So yeah, that line, I just remember coming across it and thinking like, oh my goodness, that's about, the idea of the joy in it. I snatches whatever I see, the kind of cavalier attitude, but also the idea of appropriation, that you will take anything that you come across. And where is the line? When does someone have something for themselves?
Yes. Yeah. I don't remember who said it, but somebody said something about how if you behold something with your eye, that some people believe that they own it.
Mm.
I can't remember who it was that said that, but it's interesting because it kind of goes back in some ways to Toby with his taking the pictures, and in some ways it's also, even though it should be like he should be taking these photos so we can share it and be like, no, actually the world is awful, but it is also exploitative. It is also, and I think it's interesting that he I think you mentioned something about, about like if you take a picture, it's like taking the soul of something. I can't remember if this was, I think it was. But I just loved that whole idea.
Yeah, and photography being such a new invention as well.
Yes.
That it didn't have, now we know that you can manipulate an image, but then that a photograph was seen as kind of an exact replica, an exact, almost like you kind of were seeing it for yourself, rather than that it would only be a partial truth.
Yes, there was a line that you said, let's see, dash, the truth as we decide to show it, which first of all, brilliantly said, but also goes back so much to even today, where it's like,
fake news.
Yes, exactly. And what's propaganda and what's real and what can you believe and what's,
and that's what I love about writing historical fiction, that all of the things which preoccupy me now, I can kind of look at them kind of at a slant, because fake news is of course really worrying, and all of these things can interest me and alarm me, and yet to go back and kind of look at almost where they really started to boom because of technology. Then sort of this technology now, but their technology was just kind of the invention of the telegraph, which meant that reports could be passed back to London very quickly, and it was the first time there was a war correspondent in the Crimean. So therefore all of these accounts and jostling views were kind of being put back and forth, and then were photographers showing a different side, and all of these things then being so important and really pivotal in shaping the whole war, and now kind of our own news reporting being shaped in a similar way, but by different new technologies.
Exactly, which is in some ways terrifying, but I find in some ways it's kind of comforting to know it's always been there. Exactly. Yeah. So you just have to find the people who are really there, who can really tell you the truth, who don't have a vested interest other than here's the truth, here's what's really happening. So Shelley has a great question, which is a perfect sort of ending question, is, would you ever consider doing a follow-up book about the life of Nell and the others in the female show?
I don't think it would be a novel, but at some point I'd love to write a book of short stories kind of about my first novel, The Door Factory, as well. That kind of, the characters, I really miss them. I really miss writing about them. So maybe one day kind of a book where maybe even kind of their lives can intersect a little bit and kind of explore what happens beyond it. I quite like a slightly unresolved ending, or at least an ending where you feel that the characters are still going off in the world. They are still kind of living their lives, and it's not kind of tied up with a neat bow, because I don't feel that that's what life is. I feel that there is often kind of messiness and unresolved things. But that of course means that I, as an author, feel this kind of lack of closure almost, where I'm like, no, but Mel's still touring with Stella, and I want to know what's happening, and I want to, you know, what does Pearl go on to do? What does she want? When you know the pen is in her hand, and so yes, maybe, but I don't think it would be a novel. It just might be some short stories.
Well, I would 100% read a novella that is all about Pearl, because she was my favorite. Every time she came on, I was like, oh, Pearl, what's Pearl doing? I want more Pearl.
Oh, thank you.
So good. And again, I loved the way that it ended. It was realistic, but it still had so much hope in it and joy at the same time. And it was
Good.
like bittersweet, but it was just like the perfect mix of like, okay, this is real. There's still hope for every one of them. Some people are having like the time of their lives. Some people are still struggling, but they have the agency to make those choices for themselves. They have the ability to say, okay, I choose to stay here, or I choose to go there. And I loved that. So what is next for you?
So next is, I am writing my third novel at the moment, which is quite difficult with a baby, because when I've been writing before, I kind of get obsessed with what I'm writing about. You know, it just completely preoccupies me. It's all I think about. But now I'm obsessed with this little kind of tiny, extremely podgy guy, and I love him. So I'm trying to kind of find a way to carve out time and headspace to write my third book. But I'm about 10,000 words in, so I'm making progress with it. And it's I suppose a trick plot set against the construction of a great Victorian cemetery.
Love it. Okay, I'm 1000% in. Well, okay.
You're so lovely.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm grabbing all my books. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to everybody. Oh my gosh, this was so much fun. I loved this. I could talk to you for another hour. I'm not going to, because I know you got a baby. You got to get to work. Thank you to everybody who tuned in.
Thank you for everyone who,
right?
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And who asked such lovely questions as well. So thank you.
Such good questions. Our next book is going to be When We Were Birds. I think we sent this out earlier this week, so you probably will be getting this in your mailbox soon if you haven't already. Yours will be hardcover and not my little, because mine are all ARCs, and so all mine are little softies. And yeah, and we are also going to have a Zoom. We haven't announced it yet, but we are going to have Zoom with this author as well. So it's going to be fun. So thank you to everybody. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. This was so much fun. Thank you for joining us.
Lovely. Well, thanks so much for organizing it. And it was just a great chat. And I'm so glad we're friends now.
Me too. Give your baby a hug and your husband.
Great. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.